Welcome, everyone. My name is Shane Thrapp, and I am coming to y'all from Creating Order from Chaos. And today I actually want to talk about something that is really important to me. A lot of you may not know this, but my children, Liam and Harley, were born at 27 weeks. And it was really rough for us because they're so tiny and we were so scared, right? Because all the horror stories out there that you hear and all of the different things out there, we were so scared for our babies. But one of the things that I really came across that really helped us was early intervention and parent training. And so I want to kind of touch on that a little bit today and talk about something that a lot of people with ADHD may not really understand the importance of. Because when we think about treatment for ADHD, we think about medication. Let's give the child a pill, right? Or all of these different things that are out there. And I run an ADHD parent support group on Facebook, and I also run an autism parent support group on Facebook. I'll put all the links and all that stuff in the diddly do. And what I really wanted to give a better understanding of today, though, is the importance of early intervention. Regardless of whether or not you think that your child has ADHD or autism or some sort of neurodivergence, and this is definitely important for those parents out there who do know you have ADHD or autism, because we know that ADHD is hereditary. Early intervention parental training is hugely important for the management of ADHD and autism in our children. And one of the biggest things I see in our parent support group are questions like, I don't understand what ADHD is, or does my child need medication? What treatments actually work? Do I give my child a bunch of these supplements? How do I treat ADHD naturally? And look, all of those questions are really important. But what we really need to start understanding in this is the only way that we get those answers is by doing parent training. And when we look at the American Pediatric Association, when they're talking about the treatment for ADHD or autism, or when we look at groups like CHAD and other things like that, when we look at their first line of defense is parent training. Because the important thing to understand about parent training is that it is something that you can put in place as soon as you suspect that your child may have ADHD or autism or some sort of neurodivergence. And the thing is when you learn about parent training, nothing that you're going to learn is going to be harmful or anything if your children wind up being neurotypical. In fact, what you're going to learn are some really beneficial keys to being a good parent and really giving your child the tools to thrive. So, what is parental training? Parental training, first off, is not about fixing your child or making them normal, right? We know that ADHD and autism are neurodevelopmental conditions, and that children with ADHD or autism need understanding, not shame. And it really is, like I said earlier, something that you need to put in place early on. For parents who think that their children may have ADHD as young as 4, for parents who have children that they suspect may have autism as young as 2. And it's important to understand, like, this is very early on and often before they can actually get a medical diagnosis. Parent training starts with you. And it can be implemented after the fact, but we'll get into a reason why you want to do it before later on. So, what do we learn in parent training? First off, we need to recognize the signs of neurodivergence in our children and how these things can manifest in our children. Whenever I was learning these things for my babies, one of the biggest keys was they readjusted my expectations. We've seen a lot of the books that are out there, like What to Expect When You're Expecting and things like that, that give us these milestones that our children are supposed to reach. But what we have to understand is that if we have neurodivergent children, they may not hit those milestones. And that can cause a lot of fear for us. We're already dealing with fear, especially if our children are born premature or if they may have other issues like that. We don't need that fear. So the very first thing that I had to sit down with a therapist with when we were discussing this was what to actually expect, what my milestones actually needed to be, adjusting my expectations. The next thing I started learning was actually how to use strategies like positive reinforcement, routines, and clear boundaries from an early age, getting the child used to these different things, learning how to help them communicate more effectively away from the normal verbal components, right? Because I knew I had ADHD and I had autism. So nonverbal autism was a fear of mine. And what I really learned through therapy was how to put in place different types of communication methodologies. So methods such as having a picture board where a child who may not have the word for what they want could go to and point at. It's much easier for them to physically do a thing, right? Uppy, uppies, right? They want you to pick them up, right? That's obvious. But another thing was sign language. Children can pick up sign language at a much earlier age than they can verbally speaking, especially if their children happen to need a more formulaic system that's easier for them to do than processing speech. The other thing, and I think this is the biggest one and why parental training is so important, is creating a supportive environment where the children can feel accepted and understood regardless, right? It didn't matter if my children were neurodivergent or neurotypical. What I had to learn was to readjust my expectations and then build a system around them that worked effectively for them. And this is the key to parental training. These also kind of teach us about emotional dysregulation. They also teach us about how to model practical habits. They teach us about better sleep hygiene or even like limiting screen time and having a manageable system in place where we aren't necessarily just putting our kids in front of a YouTube and letting them watch whatever they want. We're also managing what they're watching. And in my opinion, one of the things I really enjoy is managing the screen time by also making sure that what they are watching is quality, something educational, something that they can learn from. Or if they're on their tablets, then it's things where they're actually learning to color or to program, which my child, who is 5, is now learning how to program, which is absolutely bonkers. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to understand, but we need to understand this early on. Now, why? Why is it so important to understand this early on? Well, let's be blunt. If our children are neurodivergent, it's hard. And it only gets harder as they get older, especially when we start putting school in the mix. A lot of the people in a parent support group, they come into these groups and they're desperate. They're desperate for help and they don't know. And they're hitting burnout. It's really important to start early because what you want to do is you want to arm yourself with this information before things start going into crisis mode. Because once you hit crisis mode, once you hit burnout, you're not going to have the same ability to put in place those things that you needed to do earlier on. So this is why parent training is so important whenever you're dealing with neurodivergent children. And I mean this, and again, even if your child does wind up being neurotypical, a lot of the stuff that you're going to learn is still going to be hugely beneficial. So this is something that if you have ADHD or autism or some sort of neurodivergence, because these things are hereditary, you should start learning as soon as you possibly can, just in case, because it's not going to hurt. And it's going to give you the tools and resources that you need moving forward in your life to be a better parent, no matter what. The next thing I want to talk about is the role of therapy in ADHD treatment, right? Because what we're kind of talking about is learning and managing ADHD at a level. And one of the things that we know is behavioral therapy is super beneficial for children who have ADHD or autism. This is therapy that is designed to help children regulate their emotions, build coping skills, and improve their social interactions with the world around them. Things like play therapy, things of that nature, music therapy, equine therapy. My kids happen to love horses. And This also allows parents to have a person that they can talk to about what they're dealing with their children, who can also give them feedback to say, actually, your child is hitting the milestones I would expect of a child with autism to hit at this point, right? Yes, it's further behind than what we would expect in a neurotypical child, but that's perfectly fine. They're hitting the milestones we expect them to hit, and this is good. And that reassurance kind of helps you feel better about what you're dealing with. But there's another aspect of therapy that's super important for parents. Therapy for you. You need a space to be able to talk about the frustrations and the stress and the emotions. And for some of y'all, you may actually discover that as you're going through this process, that maybe you have ADHD or you have autism. And if you learn about these things earlier on and you're working with a therapist, you can get referred to a psychiatrist and start getting your own treatment in place. And once you start having your own treatment in place, you're going to be in a much healthier place to be able to be there for your child when they start struggling. Instead of you finding out your child has ADHD, then you find out that you have ADHD, and now both of you are trying to learn all of these different things together, and you're trying to put in place all these different things, and you're having to go to work, and now your kids are starting school, right? You understand how the snowball effect happens there, and you start getting really frustrated and stressed out? It's important to understand, everyone. This is why parental training and therapy early on in your children's lives is really important. So, what else is parental training good for? One of the things that you're going to learn in parent training is how to monitor your child's behaviors, how to monitor their emotional regulation. What kind of food allergies do they have? What kind of different activities they enjoy? All these different things are going to come into play because you're going to start monitoring them and being more aware of them and tracking them. Now, why is that important? Well, eventually, if you do discover that your child or suspect that your child has ADHD or autism or something along those lines, you've already have all these tools in place and you can try all these different techniques and you can make sure your child is running outside and playing with other kids and you're giving them vitamins, you're making sure they're eating a healthy-ish diet. You've done all these different things, but your child may still need some help. Well, once they hit a certain age, working with your pediatrician, you can get them diagnosed if you feel like they may have this, and then you can get it tested. And you can tell the doctor what you've seen, what you've experienced, and what your expectations were, and how your child is still struggling. This is really valuable information for them because they're going to hand you a whole packet of papers and ask you to fill out all this documentation to get a good history, both of your child and you, because we know that ADHD and autism are hereditary. And the more that you understand about ADHD and neurodivergence, the more you're going to be able to fill out these paperwork much more effectively. You're going to be able to give the doctor the feedback that you need. And that's going to be able to inform the doctor as to, well, the parent is doing all of these different things. So, what I think may be needed here is maybe we should start trying medication since your child is still struggling, even with this supportive environment. The other thing to understand is this also allows you to be the advocate that your child needs. You can go into your preschool and you can say, hey, my child, I believe, has ADHD. We haven't had him tested yet, but I have ADHD. And this is the things that we've discovered along the way. Could you keep an eye on some of these things for us and give us feedback on that? And then as you're going through that process of pre-K and in kindergarten, and they're giving you feedback, you're going to be able to take that documentation and that understanding to the doctor to say, actually, we're seeing some educational issues as well. Let's add this to their record so that we can kind of move forward with what we need to do for them. But it also makes you able to counter some of those people in your family who may shrug off mental health, or they may try to criticize your parenting of your child because they see ADHD or autism as some moral failing of yours because you're not disciplining your child enough. If you are going through parental training, and you have the expectations and you know your child's managing them, but you're still dealing with emotional dysregulations, you're able to push back on that kind of talk. And you're able to kind of do these different things where you're empowering yourself to empower your child and set healthy boundaries with the parents and family members and other people out there in your lives, including teachers. So, when we're talking about understanding how to really effectively manage ADHD or autism or neurodivergence in our children, we really need to start with understanding these issues ourselves. And what I really hope that y'all gain from this is the importance of parental training, getting the education that you need about these different issues your children are facing, and hopefully, if you face these issues yourselves, getting into support groups out there if they're made for adults too. Because the more that you understand about these issues, the more that you're going to be able to support your children. I hope everyone understands what I mean about this because all of us want our children to grow up and thrive. Join me in the adventure going forward.